The last light was fading from the Texas plains when he heard the knock. Not a strong one, more like the wind had found a hollow place to rest its hand. Elias Hart lifted his head from the workbench, the rasp of his whetstone falling silent. For a moment he thought it was memory again, the kind that came just before nightfall when the mind mistook loneliness for sound. But then it came again. 3 soft strikes, unsteady, human. He stood, slow and wary. For 12 years he'd lived out here alone, where the land met nothing but its own horizon. His cabin, once meant for 2, had shrunk with the silence until it was little more than a shell. A bed, a stove, a single chair. No one came this far unless they were lost, desperate, or dangerous. When he opened the door, all 3 stared back at him. A woman stood in the dust, her dress torn, face streaked with mud and blood. The evening wind caught her hair, tangled, heavy with grit. Her breath came shallow, and in her eyes he saw the look of someone who had been running for far too long. Her hands trembled as she tried to speak, but the only words that came were a whisper, raw and hollow. "Please, just make it quick." Elias froze. She swayed, 1 step forward, then folded to her knees in the dirt. Instinct made him catch her before she hit the ground. Her skin burned with fever, and when he pressed his palm against her back, he felt the slow, irregular pulse of a wound beneath the torn fabric. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask who she was running from. He simply lifted her into his arms, light as a sack of wheat, and carried her inside. The door shut against the wind with a dull thud, sealing the 2 of them in a space that hadn't known another heartbeat in years. He laid her on the bed, tore a strip from his own shirt, and pressed it against the wound. It was deep, a bullet by the look of it, not fresh, but not old enough to forgive neglect. Her eyes fluttered open once, catching on his face. "You're him," she rasped. "Who?" he asked. "The one they said, 'Don't go near,' the man who doesn't speak." He said nothing to that, only fetched a basin and poured the last of the clean water over her side. She cried out once, then bit it back. When the bleeding slowed, he bound it tight and sat back in the chair beside the bed, watching her chest rise and fall. The cabin smelled of dust and firewood. Outside, coyotes sang somewhere across the flats. Elias watched her the way one watches a flame too weak to keep burning, afraid that a breath might end it. At last she stirred, her voice a thread. "Why didn't you do it?" "Do what?" "Make it quick." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes steady. "Because I don't kill what's trying to live." She stared at him, confusion clouding her fever. Then she turned her face to the wall. Tears found their way down the dirt on her cheek, darkening it to clay. He didn't look away. There was something about her, not the kind of beauty a man spoke of, but the kind that reminded him he was still human. When she finally slept, he pulled his coat from the peg and laid it over her shoulders. Then he sat by the fire until dawn, staring into the embers like they held an answer he had no right to ask for. The storm broke just after sunrise. Sharp wind, grit, and rain that stung like penance. He stepped out to fetch more wood, the old ache in his leg reminding him of years he'd tried to forget. When he came back inside, she was awake, propped against the wall, clutching the coat like a shield. "You should have left me there," she said softly. He set the wood down, wiped his hands, and met her eyes. "Maybe," he said. "But I didn't." She looked away again, like the words cost her too much to hold. He poured coffee into a tin cup and set it by her side. Steam rose between them, curling in the cold air like something fragile and alive. For a while, neither spoke. Then, As the rain eased and the smell of wet dust crept in, she whispered, "I don't even know your name." "Elias." She nodded once, tired eyes falling closed. "I'm Claire." Her voice broke on the name, like it still didn't belong to her. Elias sat back, the fire cracking softly, and thought about how many times in his life he had heard that same sound, the breaking of something that still wanted to hold together. The rain didn't stop for 2 days. It came in sheets, flattening the grass and carving lines through the red clay. Inside the cabin, the world shrank to the crackle of the fire, the smell of wet leather, and the sound of her breathing. Thin, uneven, stubborn. Elias watched over her without meaning to. Each time she stirred, he found himself looking up from the chair, knife half sharpened, waiting for her to open her eyes. When she did, they were the color of dusk, that tired blue between day and night. "You're still here," she whispered once. He nodded. "So are you." Her lips twitched, not quite a smile. "That wasn't the plan." He said nothing, only handed her a cup of water. Her hands shook when she took it, but she drank. It had been a long time since anyone had spoken in this room besides him. Longer still since the words had felt alive. She tried to sit up the next morning, but the wound made her wince. Elias was at her side before she could fall forward, one steady arm behind her back. The contact startled them both. For him, it was the memory of warmth. For her, it was something worse. Trust. "You don't have to help me," she said. He didn't answer, just adjusted the blanket over her shoulders and stepped away. The space between them filled with the low hum of the storm. When she spoke again, her voice carried a weight heavier than the rain. "They took everything," she said. "My brother owed them. Cards, whiskey, the kind of debt you don't talk about. They couldn't find him, so they came for me." Elias kept his eyes on the fire. "How far?" "South, near the border." She drew in a sharp breath. "I ran when they started fighting. I didn't look back. I don't even know who got shot first." He turned then, the movement slow. "That's their bullet in you?" She nodded once. "One of them didn't miss." Her fingers brushed the bandage, and she gave a small, bitter laugh. "Guess I wasn't worth chasing after." Elias leaned against the table, arms folded. "You made it here." She looked up, eyes bright in the dim light. "Does that make me lucky?" "No," he said. "It makes you alive." The words hung in the air, simple and solid. For a moment she looked like she might cry, but she didn't. Instead, she pulled the blanket tighter and turned her face to the fire. That night, when he checked her bandage, she didn't flinch. The fever had broken, but exhaustion clung to her like dust. He worked in silence, unwrapping the cloth, cleaning the wound, retying it with steady, practiced hands. When he was done, she said, "You've done this before." He paused. "Long time ago. For your wife?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't look at her. "Yes." The fire popped. "I'm sorry," she murmured. He nodded once. "So am I." For a while, neither of them spoke. The rain eased outside, and the quiet began to feel almost natural. When dawn came again, the sky was pale and still. Claire was strong enough to stand, though she leaned on the wall to do it. Elias watched her move, slow, deliberate, like a deer testing its legs after being caught in a trap. "I'll leave when I can walk straight," she said. "You'll leave when you can ride," he replied. She blinked, caught between gratitude and defiance. "You don't even know me." "Don't need to." She stared at him, trying to understand the kind of man who would save a stranger without a reason. Then she nodded, almost to herself. Outside, the land steamed under the first touch of sun. The storm had washed everything clean, The ground, the air, maybe even something inside them both. For the first time, Elias stepped past the threshold, leaving the door open behind him. And for the first time, Claire didn't feel like running. By the third morning, she could make it to the porch without swaying. Elias set a chair in the sun and said nothing while she lowered herself onto it. The light laid itself across the yard, soft and honest, showing every nail head in the rail, every nick in the axe handle, the thin steam lifting from damp soil. Claire rested her palm against the cedar post and closed her eyes, as if light itself were medicine. He went about the chores like always, measured and sure. He split a short stack of pitchwood. He checked the sorrel's hoof and rubbed down the gelding with long strokes that calmed even the dust. She watched him the way people study rivers, trying to understand where they begin. "Why here?" she asked at last. He glanced up. "Because it's quiet." "Quiet can get loud," she said. "It did," he answered. "Then it didn't." When she smiled, it wasn't polished. It was the kind that comes after you've been hungry a while. By noon, she was steady enough to shell beans at the table while he mended a cinch strap. They didn't trade histories. They traded the kind of facts you learn by paying attention. She learned he cut the coffee with a pinch of salt. He learned she folded towels along the selvage without thinking. Small truths, easy to carry. He saddled the sorrel before dusk and led him in a circle, slow, letting the horse feel her near. "Not yet," he said, when she reached for the horn. Her pride bristled, but she nodded. The day would come soon enough. She slept better that night. The rain smell had faded from the cabin. In its place, iron, cedar, flour, the ghost of tobacco in the rafters. Elias sat at the table until late, hands still, eyes on a knot in the plank floor that looked like a closed eye. He did not notice the first coyote call on the ridge. He did hear the second sound, the one that didn't belong. Hoofbeats, not drifting, drawing a straight line. He stood without scraping the chair and blew out the lamp. Claire stirred and pushed up on an elbow, already reading the quiet. "What is it?" "Riders," he said. "2, maybe 3. Her breath thinned. "Then they found me." Elias crossed to the wall and took down the rifle. He checked the action by feel, the way a man checks a pulse. "Back room," he said. "No light. Wait for me to talk first." She wanted to argue. Instead, she did what people do when they have run far and finally trust one direction. She went. The hoofbeats slowed. Leather creaked. A horse blew warm air. A knuckle tapped the door once, polite as a banker. "Evening the house," a voice called, mild and smiling. "We're looking for a lady passed through with a hole in her side and an inconvenient talent for leaving places in a hurry." Elias opened the door a hand's width. The night smelled of sage and coin. 2 men sat their horses at the edge of the yard. A third waited back where the fence met the cottonwoods, hat low, a watcher. "You're late," Elias said, voice flat. "Long road," the first man answered. Moonlight cut across his face and drew neat lines around his mouth. He wasn't a ranch hand, and didn't pretend. "Name's Calder. Gentleman behind me is Pike. We're licensed to collect a debt that acquired legs." "If you're selling sermons, try Sunday," Elias said. "If you're buying water, troughs by the barn." Calder's smile didn't change. "We're collecting a woman. We have paper. You might have seen her. Slim, stubborn, easy to recognize for the way trouble keeps picking her first." "You're from the house that started that trouble," Elias said. "House, investors, concerns," Calder replied. "Names change, money doesn't." Elias let the door ride a little wider on its hinges. "You'll show me your paper. I'll show you the road out." Calder didn't move. "Let's not rehearse things we both know are lies. She's here, It's a tidy place. Tidy men like to fix what isn't theirs. Elias didn't blink. Then you know tidy men also bury quiet. Pike slid a look to his partner. The third rider shifted in the trees. Somewhere far, an owl asked a question, and got no answer. Calder changed the shape of his smile. Let's be neighborly. We'll search, and if we don't find her, we'll take your apology and leave with our pride. If we do find her, we'll take her, and leave with our due. You'll touch nothing in this house, Elias said. You going to keep us honest with that rifle? With the ground, he answered. It likes to keep what falls on it. The air thinned in the space between men. Calder's horse sidestepped, impatient with a conversation that didn't involve grass. Last ask, Calder said, voice softening into something colder. Call her out. Elias opened the door the rest of the way and stepped onto the stoop. He set the rifle against the post as if he meant to forget it there, and walked down until his boots met the line where yard dirt becomes road dust, the old border every man understands. She came here dying, he said, not loud, not soft. She left here alive. If your employers want to argue about that, they can argue with me, and they can do it under a judge's roof, not mine. Calder's eyes measured the porch, the windows, the shadow in the second cottonwood that was not a shadow. Judge is 2 days east, he said. We're 1 minute now. You don't have a minute, Elias said. You have a choice. The third man nudged his horse forward from the trees, impatient, hands wrong on the reins. Claire, from the back room, could feel the shape of him without seeing him. Some men ride like they owe the animal something. Some ride like they'll owe the dirt next. Pike spat into the dust. This is a lot of poetry for a stranger, he muttered. Elias kept his eyes on Calder. Then let me be plain. You ride on. Calder sighed, as if disappointed in a student who refused his sums. He reached slowly inside his coat and produced a folded paper. He didn't offer it. He simply held it in the moonlight, the seal catching a white edge, the letters dark and well-fed. Written words, he said, beat spoken ones. From the back of the cabin came the rip of linen as Claire tore the hem from her petticoat to bind her side tighter. She listened to voices shape the night, tried to fit their edges to the map of men she knew. The third rider shifted again, and she knew his impatience like a scar. Lucas Aval had hired lawyers who wore gloves and riders who didn't. This one didn't. Elias spoke before the knowledge could turn to fear. Paper's a fine thing, he said, but it's not the first law. Calder tilted his head. And what is? Shelter, Elias answered. A man gives it, he keeps it. The words were old, older than county lines and notches on courthouse doors. Even Pike blinked. Calder let the smile slide away at last. Your neighbors will tire of your principles when we bring them the bill. They can pay it with their silence, Elias said, and then he did something none of them expected. He turned his back on 3 armed men and walked up the steps, set the rifle in its notch by the door, and lifted down a second thing from the wall, a length of braided rawhide, cracked and oiled. He looped it around his wrist and came back down as if he were walking into his own shadow. You ever been taught what happens when a horse spooks to a whistle? He asked. Calder frowned. What? Elias put 2 fingers to his mouth and sent a short, sharp note across the yard. It bounced off the cottonwoods and came back meaner. In the same breath, he snapped the rawhide against the ground. The sorrel in the corral didn't budge, but the roan under the third rider exploded, not from fear of sound, but from the smell that came with it. Fox urine rubbed along the fence post that afternoon when Elias noticed tracks and decided the night would bring company. The roan jolted, reared, and the third man grabbed for the horn with both hands like a green boy. His rifle clattered to the dirt. Pike swore and lunged. The horse cut sideways. Calder's mount danced and lost the line. Elias didn't raise the rifle. He didn't need to. He stepped forward and brought the rawhide down across the roan's chest. Not cruel, not careless, just enough to turn the animal hard toward the road. Momentum did the rest. In 2 heartbeats, dust ate moonlight, and hooves hammered distance. Calder hauled his horse back under him and sat, breathing through his teeth, eyes narrowed into something that finally looked like respect and anger shaking hands. "You'll answer for that," he said. "I'll answer for everything," Elias replied. "You decide where." Calder studied the man on the porch and the dark window behind him, and did the arithmetic again, slower this time. He slipped the paper back into his coat and gathered the reins. 2 days, he said. Then we come with a writ and a rope. Bring a preacher, Elias said. He'll be lonely. They rode out without showing their backs. When the last hoofbeat emptied into the hills, the night swelled and then settled, like a lung after a hard run. Claire stepped into the doorway, one hand on the jamb, face pale but set. "You didn't have to do that," she said. He looked at her as if she'd spoken in a language he hadn't heard in years. "Yes," he said. "I did." "You risked your land," she whispered. He shook his head. "I risked the thing that makes it worth owning." She swallowed, eyes bright. "You don't even know if I deserve it." He let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. "Deserve has nothing to do with a person bleeding on your bed." For a while, they stood like that, a man with dust on his boots and a raw hide looped around his wrist, a woman holding herself upright with more will than strength. The stars leaned close, curious. "We leave at first light," he said. "If they come back with paper, talking won't help." Her fingers tightened on the jamb. "Where?" "North first," he said, already drawing the map in his head. "Then west. There's a judge in Larkspur who owes me a favor he doesn't like remembering, and a friend in the high country who doesn't ask names when he points you to a back trail." Claire's mouth trembled, but her voice didn't. "I'll slow you down." "I've been slow for years," he said. "It'll feel familiar." A small sound escaped her, something between a laugh and a wound healing. She stepped aside so he could pass, and when he did, her sleeve brushed his hand. Neither of them moved for a breath, as if the contact had changed the weather. He packed by lamplight, quiet, precise. Cartridges, flour, salt, coffee, a coil of clean bandage, the book of poems he told himself he didn't need. She folded the spare shirt he pretended wasn't for her and slipped it into the saddlebag. The cabin began to look like a place that had just decided to move. When the lamp burned low, she said his name for the first time without fear. "Elias." He turned. "Thank you," she said, and the words carried more weight than any oath. He nodded once. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we go make truth heavier than paper." Outside, somewhere on the far ridge, a coyote yipped and then went quiet, as if even the wild had agreed to listen. They left at gray dawn, the kind that hides the line between ground and sky, until hooves draw it themselves. Elias set a steady pace along the creek, then up through a cut of juniper and rock, where the air smelled clean, and the earth told fewer secrets. Claire rode the sorrel with both hands light on the reins, her side bound tight, her breath even if not easy. He rode beside her, saying little, watching the trail and the places trails could become traps. By mid-morning the sun pushed the chill out of the gullies. A hawk ghosted along the ridge, and the world sounded like leather and wind and small stones rolling under iron. When they stopped to water the horses, Claire knelt and cupped her palms and drank the way people do who still remember being thirsty. Elias pointed with his chin toward a notch in the far hills. "Town sits beyond that," he said. "Hollis. They know me there." She searched his face. "Good or bad?" "Old," he said, and that was answer enough. Hollis was a hard-sided place that had learned to be polite around grief. A blacksmith's hammer counted the seconds. A dog lay in a wedge of shade. A boy carried a loaf of bread like something alive. Elias tied the horses at the end post in front of the general store and stood a moment, as if measuring how much of himself to bring inside. The bell over the door gave a thin, tired note. A woman behind the counter looked up, hands still on a stack of calico. She needed only one heartbeat to know him. "Elias Crow," she said, not with warmth, not with ice. "You've been leaving the world alone too long?" "Morning, Ruth," he answered. "Flour, salt, laudanum if you have it." Ruth's eyes slid to Claire's bandage, to the sag of one shoulder, to the way she was trying not to take up space. "Haven't seen you with company since," she began, then let the rest die. She moved with brisk hands, pulling tins and a small brown bottle, wrapping them in paper that crinkled like dry leaves. "Things in town are quieter than the last time you helped make them loud," she said. "Let's keep it so." "We'll be gone before dinner," he said. Ruth paused with the laudanum. "Judge Isbell rode through 2 days ago," she said. "Headed west, due back by week's end. You looking for him?" "I'm looking to be on the right side of his desk when I am," Elias said. Ruth set the bottle down and lowered her voice. "You still carry that debt?" He didn't meet her eyes. "I carry what's mine." "Then carry fast," she said. "There's talk east of hired men who don't tire." Claire laid a coin on the counter with careful fingers. "Thank you," she said, and Ruth looked at her fully then, as if deciding something private. "Girl," Ruth said, gentle around the word. "Eat at the back before you go. No charge." She didn't wait for pride to argue. She rounded the counter and set about making that command true with bread and a wedge of hard cheese and a cup of coffee the color of old walnut. Elias stood guard by the doorway, without looking like a guard. The street had the kind of quiet that can change in one decision. Across the way, the barbershop door swung once and closed. A man in a tan coat with city shoulders leaned in a frame of shadow and watched the pair on the porch like a tailor measuring a suit he meant to own. Claire ate without hurry, the way a person stretches a kindness so it lasts. When she finished, she covered the cup with the saucer to keep dust out and stood. "Thank you, Ruth," Elias said. "Don't make me regret it," Ruth replied, and then she pressed a small roll of cloth into Claire's hand. "Needle and thread. A life comes apart in seams first." They took the alley out, skirting the main road and the gaze that tried to pull weight from their backs. At the livery, Elias traded a word with the old man who kept the stalls, a word that was not a name, but meant the same thing to men who had seen winter together. They were back in the saddle and swinging north when the man in the tan coat stepped from the shade and blocked the narrow mouth of the lane with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Crow," he said, as if greeting a customer. "You left me in the habit of arriving a day behind you. Tiring but instructive." Elias didn't feign surprise. "Calder, you make good time." "Motivation is a fine horse," Calder said. He tipped his hat toward Claire. "And Miss Lair, look at you, upright and breathing. You must be a quick study." Claire held his gaze and kept her hands still, and it cost her. "Is it always like this?" she asked. "Men speaking to paper before they speak to people?" Calder chuckled. "Spoken words vanish in air. Written ones live long enough to matter." "Then write and be gone," Elias said. "We have miles." Calder stepped closer, not enough to spook the sorrel, enough to let his coat fall open and show the low shine of a pistol butt, like a promise he didn't want to keep yet. "I respect your stubbornness, Mr. Crow. The men who pay me respect results. I have a writ. Proper seal, proper hand. I could walk the lady across the street to the sheriff and make this easy." "Sheriff Dobson died last spring," Ruth's voice said from the store door, dry as rope. "We have a deputy who counts beans better than bullets and knows enough to keep his ledgers clean." Calder's eyes flicked her way and came back. "Then we will skip ceremony," he said, smiling again. His hand moved, not fast, only certain. Elias didn't go for the rifle. He didn't reach for the reins. He shifted his weight and took a small step so the sun left his face and gave it to Calder's, and then he said a single word low and sharp in the way men use on colts bred to bolt. "Now." The sorrel leapt, not forward, but sideways, as if an angel had shoved her. Claire caught the horn, and her knee locked and held. The move cut Calder's angle clean, pushed him into the shadow of the livery post, where a nail head jumped the skin at his wrist when he tried to draw, and pain made his fingers clumsy. Elias didn't hit him. He took the man's coat at the elbow, turned, and set him gently but without mercy against the upright, where wood could do the speaking. Pike stepped from behind a stack of hay, as if he'd grown there, gun half out and undecided. He got a look at Elias, got a look at Claire holding the sorrel quiet with both hands and not screaming, and something tired crossed his face. "Calder," Pike said. "This town remembers him. I don't care to." Calder breathed once, twice, measuring humiliation and the path to using it later. He wet his lip with his tongue and smiled again, but this time it had blood in it. "Very good," he said. "You have a few more hours of being clever. Enjoy them. We'll have a conversation with a badge before sundown, and then we'll do things right." "Do it," Elias said. "Ask the deputy for the road to Judge Isbell. I'll be on it." Calder lifted a hand in surrender that meant nothing and stepped back into his shape. Pike backed out of the alley with the calm of a man who could keep his word and his distance at once. When they were gone, the street acted the way streets do, pretending it hadn't been watching. Elias turned to Ruth. "Sorry," he said, and the word held years. "Go," she answered. "You still have a head start if you don't stand here apologizing to Timber." They rode hard through the notch and dropped into a country stitched with low willows and old washes where storms had made their own maps. Claire let the sorrel stretch and felt the animal's strength pass into her legs like current. Her side burned, but it was a live heat now, not the cold knife of 3 nights ago. Elias set the line, never straight for long, always cutting across places a man on a city horse would hesitate. They camped in the lee of a sandstone shoulder with the wind pressed flat above them. He made a small, clean fire and boiled coffee and set a pot for beans, because people think better when their mouths are busy. While it cooked, he walked a slow circle and read the ground like a book he had copied in his youth. 2 pronghorn had crossed at dawn. A fox had worried the edge of a rabbit run. Nothing heavier had come within 100 yards. Claire watched his steps, and then looked up at the band of sky caught between stone. "Heard what Ruth said," she murmured. "You made things loud once." He didn't answer at first. The coffee hissed when he moved it off the coals. "I had a brother," he said. "Name was Matthew. He liked the sound of a fiddle and the first slice of pie. He rode to Hollis one night to collect money owed him for calves, and found the saloon owner with a pistol and an idea about interest. Matt died on the floor where the sawdust couldn't soak it fast enough." Claire didn't speak. He kept his eyes on the fire, because sometimes a man can only tell truths to a hinge of light. I rode in late, he said. I said words and then I made good on them. The owner sold the place the next week and took his ideas east. Ruth decided a man who did what I did shouldn't be pushed, and the rest of the town decided I should be left alone. I tried to oblige them. That's why you live where the road forgets your name, she said. That's part, he answered. The other part is that quiet is lighter to carry if you've already dropped everything else. She nodded, fingers worrying the edge of the roll of cloth Ruth had pressed on her. Your quiet saved me, she said, and he shook his head once. You saved you, he said. I stood nearby. The beans softened. They ate with spoons, leaning toward the heat. When the last red cracked under her teeth, Claire set the tin aside and wiped the back of her wrist across her mouth like a child. She searched the fire a long moment and then worked the words loose. Thank you for not asking me to be innocent, she said. He looked up. I didn't, he said, plain. I asked you to tell me when it mattered. It matters now, she said. Her eyes held his, and he understood she meant more than law, more than paper, more than Calder's polished patience. She meant the part of a life where you stop walking alone, even if you don't know how to lift your feet in step yet. He nodded, and the nod carried an oath he wasn't ready to say out loud. Get some sleep, he said, softer than before. Judge rides early. We need to ride earlier. They traded watches without ceremony. He took the first, listening to the stone talk to the wind and the wind answer in a tongue he was learning again. When it was her turn, she sat with her back to the warm rock and her hands cupped around the half-cold coffee, and watched his shoulders rise and fall under the blanket. He slept like a man who had earned it, and didn't believe it would last. They were mounted before dawn, cutting west by the long arcs of grass that hold dew like secrets. By noon, the track broadened, and fresh wagon ruts pinned it to a destination. They topped a low rise and saw a freight coach ahead, 2 mules lathered, driver flicking the lines with the economy of men who've hauled more than distance. A second wagon carried a wooden chest with iron bands, and beside it rode a small figure with a hat too large and a back too straight to be anything but stubborn. Elias slowed. That's Isbel's guard, he said. He keeps a boy on a pony to make thieves embarrassed. Claire smiled, without meaning to. Would it work on you? It does now, he said, and they eased down the slope. The boy saw them first and rose in the stirrups, trying to be tall enough to make a warning worth its noise. The driver hauled back, and the mules leaned into their collars. From the second wagon, a man in a black coat stood and shaded his eyes with a palm. His face had the careful look of someone who can hear both sides of a story and then sleep after choosing one. Judge Isbel, Elias called. Elias Crow. I have business that can't wait its turn. The judge squinted, and then nodded once, surprised he wasn't surprised. Crow, they still tell stories about you in Hollis. They tell the short version, Elias said. The judge dropped from the wagon and dusted the knees of his coat with a fastidious swipe. You have a paper to file? He asked. Or is this one of your better speeches? Both, Elias said, and he brought Claire forward with a tug on the sorrel's rein. This is Claire Lair, he said, and the name went up into the air and settled there, as if it had been waiting for a place to land. She's accused by a railroad heir who calls a dowry a chain. I want sanctuary recognized under the law that keeps a door open for people who don't have doors left. Isbel looked at Claire, then at the binding at her side, then at the way she sat her horse square even when the ground asked for a lean. He took in the band of a pendant chain at her throat that had left a clean mark in dust, a mark a thief wouldn't keep. He took in Elias, who had found words again after years of spending none, and was spending them with care. "You have witnesses," the judge said. "You have statements." "I have truth," Elias answered, "and I have Hollis if you need a town to speak." The judge lifted a brow. "Hollis owes me 3 pies and a headache. It will do." He opened the iron-banded chest and pulled out a ledger, a sheet of paper, a pen that had learned the weight of people. "Ruth will write what needs writing. I'll ride in tomorrow. If the lady can walk, she can stand before me and say what she just said with her eyes." "She can," Claire said, finding her voice before he could find it for her. Isbel's gaze warmed a notch. "You saved me the trouble of pretending you didn't have one," he said. He signed something neat and exact. "This buys you a day," he said, handing Elias the paper. "Bring it to the deputy. He'll know I'm serious." A gunshot cracked the distance in half. The boy on the pony flinched, the mules danced, the driver cursed in a language older than the judge's pen. A second shot clipped bark from a mesquite to their right. Calder's voice floated up the draw, still easy, now edged. "There's the judge," he called. "Saves me the walk." Isbel's mouth thinned. "I don't much like being a stage for other men's plays," he said. Elias handed the paper to Claire without looking away from the draw. "Ride," he said. "Straight to Hollis. Ruth first, deputy next. Put this on his desk. Don't stop for arguments wearing perfume." "What about you?" she asked. "Somebody has to teach Calder the difference between a writ and the world," Elias said. He wheeled his horse toward the sound before the question could find another shape. Claire jammed the paper into the inside of her bodice where no hand would reach twice and kicked the sorrel forward. The mare lunged, and the world became wind, and the taste of copper, and the way fear and certainty can live together without fighting when there's no time. Behind her she heard Elias call something that might have been a prayer, or a joke, or the name of a man he used to be. Ahead of her, Hollis lay under a wash of hot light that made the roofs blur and the road look longer than truth. She leaned low, and the sorrel stretched, and between one breath and the next, Claire understood that trust is sometimes a door you run through while it's still closing, because waiting has already cost too much. She didn't look back. Not because she didn't want to, because this was the part where looking back breaks the spell. And somewhere in the heat behind her, a broken cowboy who had learned to live with silence raised his voice for the first time in 15 years and made it mean something more than grief. The sound of gunfire faded into the wind. Claire rode hard through the low draws, the paper pressed against her chest. Behind her, the hills kept their secrets. Ahead lay the thin promise of a town that might still believe in law. Hollis appeared like a mirage, roofs shimmering in heat, the smell of dust and iron rising from its heart. She guided the sorrel straight to the general store and threw herself from the saddle, boots hitting the ground before the horse had fully stopped. Ruth looked up from her counter. "Lord above," she said. "He told you to ride, didn't he?" Claire nodded, breath ragged, eyes wide. She pulled the paper from her dress and laid it on the counter. "Judge Isbel," she said. "He signed it himself." Ruth's hands shook only once. Then she straightened her shoulders. "Go to the deputy. Take my boy with you. He knows the way." The deputy's office was small, more ledgers than bullets. The man behind the desk blinked at the seal, then at Claire's torn sleeve and dirt-streaked face. "This says you're under protection," he said, "by order of a judge who don't hand those out easy." Before he could say more, a shout split the air outside. Calder's voice, steady as a sermon. "By authority of contract, we claim one Claire Lair, absconder from lawful bond." The deputy cursed under his breath and reached for his rifle. Ruth's boy slammed the shutters closed. Claire stood still, her hand flat on the paper as if willing it to grow roots. Calder's boots sounded heavy on the porch boards. Step aside, deputy. You don't want to die over a thief. The deputy squared his shoulders. I'll die over the law. You ain't it. The door shook once, twice, then burst inward. Calder stepped through, gun raised, coat torn from the earlier fight. His eyes found Claire, and his smile was gone. Run's over, girl. But behind him, at the threshold, another shadow moved. Elias. His coat was dusted white from limestone and gun smoke. He held the rifle low, not as a threat but as a promise already made. Step away, Calder, he said quietly. Calder turned slowly, disbelief flickering before anger took its place. You should be dead. Maybe I am, Elias said, but I'm still standing. For a breath, no one moved. Then Calder's hand twitched, just enough. The rifle spoke once. The bullet caught him in the shoulder and spun him into the doorframe. He slumped, breath hitching, eyes wide with the shock of losing. Pike, pale and shaking, dropped his gun where he stood and raised both hands. Elias lowered the barrel, exhaled, and for the first time in years, the sound carried peace. Judge Isbell arrived that evening, his wagon rolling slow through the main street. By then, the deputy had Calder bound, Pike under guard, and the townsfolk gathered in wary silence. The judge took one look at Claire, then at the paper she held like a lifeline. You rode through fire for a truth, he said. Now you'll speak it plain. She did. Every word, from the wedding that wasn't hers to the night she begged for death and found mercy instead. When she finished, even the wind outside seemed to still. Isbell nodded. The law cannot fix everything men break, he said, but it can choose who bears the blame. Miss Lair, you bear none. The verdict spread through the crowd like rain across dry earth. Ruth smiled, thin and proud. The deputy tipped his hat. And Elias, standing at the edge of the light, finally let his shoulders drop. Days later, when the dust of judgment had settled, the cabin stood quiet again. Claire sat on the porch, her hair loose, her side nearly healed. Elias walked from the barn, wiping oil from his hands. They'll talk, she said. They always do. And you'll stay? He looked out toward the horizon where the sun burned low, painting the plains in gold. I built this place for silence, he said. Didn't know it was waiting for a voice. She smiled then, slow and fragile and certain. Then I'll try not to fall quiet. He stepped closer, close enough for her to see the years in his face and the soft place grief had left behind. Don't, he said. The quiet's had its turn. Her hand found his, rough meeting rough, the air between them turning lighter. The wind carried the last of winter's dust across the yard. Inside, a kettle hissed softly, and the world, for once, didn't ask for anything more.